In 1747, a Scottish naval surgeon called James Lind ran a trial on board HMS Salisbury. 12 sailors were scurvy, split into pairs, each pair given something different: cider, vinegar, seawater, elixir of vitriol, which sounds like something you'd order in a Wetherspoons at 11:30 if you were that brave or sad. And one pair got oranges and lemons. Now, the lemon pair were back on duty in about a week, but everybody else stayed ill. Lind published it in 1753, and the Admiralty did nothing. 30 years later, another naval physician, Gilbert Blaine, read Lind's work, replicated the results, and formally asked the Admiralty to reissue lemon juice to every sailor in the fleet. The Admiralty turned him down. Two reasons on record. One, the evidence wasn't persuasive enough. And two, and this is my favourite sentence in the history of institutional decision making, lemons were too expensive. They eventually said yes in 1795, 48 years after 12 men on the Salisbury settled the question. Nobody was ever disciplined for those 48 years. There was no inquiry. There was no lessons learned document. You can't hold an inquiry into something that didn't happen. Nobody did anything because nobody did anything. And that is our episode. What happens when you don't do anything? Hello, you. How are you? Welcome to AI Levels, Education, AI Opinions, Occasional Mild Panic. I'm Andy Logan, your AI Education guy. And today's question is one word longer than it needs to be. And I've been chewing on it for weeks. What is the cost of doing nothing? We're not talking about the cost of getting AI wrong. We've done that. We're not the cost of buying something rubbish. We will do that one, don't worry. We're talking about the cost of standing still, of waiting, of the very reasonable, very defensible, very grown-up decision to hold your position until things become clearer. Because I think the decision that's been made right now in about 143 universities and 272 colleges is on a spreadsheet, and it's saying, let's enter a cost here as zero. But the cost isn't zero. It's just invisible. Let me explain. Now, here's the thing I want to be really clear about up front, because I'm not interested in doing the thing where a bloke from a tech company calls the sector dinosaurs. Institutions in this sector aren't dinosaurs, and they're not standing still because the people in them are stupid or frightened or secretly hoping it just goes away. Most of the people I meet in HE and FE are considerably sharper about AI than the people trying to sell it to them, and that's a fact. But they're standing still because of maths, specifically because of a bit of maths that their governance systems can't do. Now, think about what happens when you decide to do something. You write a business case, you name a sponsor, you commit a budget line, you set a go live date, and every single one of those things is a hostage. Because if it goes wrong, there's a document with your name on it, a number that didn't land, and a date that you missed. It's auditable, it's attributable. It can be raised at committee by someone who was against it from the start and has been waiting quite patiently. Now, think about what happens when you decide to do nothing. Nothing. Nothing happens. That's the whole point, right? There's no document. There's no sponsor. There's no date. Nobody has ever in the history of British higher education been performance managed for a transformation program that just stayed in draft. So you've got two options on the table. One of them carries a visible personal career-shaped risk, and the other carries a real risk that is diffuse, delayed, and belongs to nobody in particular. But then we're surprised when institutions choose the second one. Look, they're not being irrational. They're responding perfectly rationally to a system that only counts one of two costs. And doing nothing is very rarely presented as doing nothing because that would be awkward. It comes in three respectable costumes. First costume is the permanent pilot. You've no idea how many people I speak to, and it makes me want to cry when I find out how many pilots they've had, or they're planning, or they're running. They start as a 12-week proof of concept, and it's now in its third year. You've got 40 users, all volunteers, all enthusiasts, all quietly doing something more interesting on their own accounts anyway than what you wanted to do. But nobody's cancelling it because cancelling it would be a decision, and we don't want to make decisions, remember? Nobody scaled it because scaling would also be a decision. Look, it just exists in a kind of pleasant institutional limbo, generating quarterly updates, and everybody just sort of raises their eyebrows and hopes that nobody actually asks what's going on. The second costume is the working group. Terms of reference, membership drawn from across the institution. It meets monthly. It reports into a steering group, which reports into a committee, which receives it for information. Now, I've got genuine respect for what good governance does. You would know that if you listened to the other podcast. But a working group that has met 14 times and changed nobody's actual job isn't governance. It's a very expensive way of having a feeling. The third one is strategy. Now, this one hurts because the strategies are often good. 20 pages, proper thinking in it, ambitions, principles, maturity model, a lovely diagram with 4 quadrants, published, downloadable. And if you walked into any operational team in the building and asked what changed on Monday because of that document, the honest answer is nothing changed on Monday. None of those three is an action. They're all activity. And that's what makes them so effective at concealing inaction. You can be extremely busy doing nothing, but still produce a paper trail proving it. Can you see where we're going with this? Here's the AI explainer. This is the bit where we take a phrase that people nod along to in meetings but don't understand and never bother to find out what it means. And let me tell you now, I'm in the same boat as you on a lot of this stuff. Today, we're going to use the word technical debt. Now, the metaphor here is generally credited to a software engineer called Ward Cunningham back in the early 90s, and it's one of the genuinely useful ideas to come out of that world. It goes like this. When you build something quickly and imperfectly, a workaround, a shortcut, a bodge that gets you live on Friday, you haven't actually avoided the work. You've just borrowed it. And like any loan, you have to pay interest. Now, every future change to that system is a little bit slower. Every new person takes a bit longer to understand it, and every integration is a bit more fragile. And the crucial part, and the reason this metaphor is so good, you never get an invoice. There's no line in the budget that says technical debt £400,000. You just pay it in friction. You pay it in a developer taking 3 days instead of one. You pay it in a process that needs two people instead of none. You pay it when it shows up in your accounts as an ordinary running cost, which is exactly why it never gets challenged, because it looks normal. Now, hold that thought and swap one word, because there's an uglier cousin technical debt that nobody's given a proper name to, and I'm going to call it now decision debt. Same mechanism, different cause. Technical debt is what you owe for building something badly. Decision debt is what you owe for not building anything at all. And it behaves identically. No invoice, no line item, paid in friction, in workarounds, in people staying late, in staff turnover, in a process that eats 11 days because nobody ever redesigned it. It's paid monthly, indefinitely, in installments small enough that no individual installment is worth a business case. That's scurvy. That's what happened in the Admiralty. That's what happened when the Admiralty decided not to pay a bill that ended up for 400 dead sailors. They received attrition figures. They received 400 dead people. It's a number that had always been that size, so nobody looked at it twice. They were used to losing sailors at that rate. And the reason the Admiralty could say lemons were too expensive with a straight face is that they were comparing a real, visible, itemised cost that got added to the added to the sheet, the price for citrus, against a cost that everybody was used to, had been fully absorbed into what normal looked like. Hopefully that makes sense, but the point I'm trying to make is if you do something over and over again, you don't spot the cost because you're used to it and you just write it off. When in reality, if you stop and look at it and think, is this right? You could find a saving. Now, Blaine, to his enormous credit, was the one who did the arithmetic properly, and his argument to the Admiralty was every 50 lemons should be counted as an extra hand in the fleet. He converted the invisible cost into a currency they cared about, and that's what got it over the line. Not ethics, not evidence, not 30 years of published data, real arithmetic held in a cold, logical, normal manner. So let's do Blaine's job here. Let's put actual numbers on the do nothing column because I think when you see them together, it is genuinely startling. We've got four currencies here we're going to talk about when it comes to doing nothing. Currency one is money. The Office for Students published its financial sustainability report in May. Now, just over a third of English institutions, 35.8%, reported a deficit for 2024 to 25. And without mitigating action, that's forecast to rise to 42.7% for 2025-26. That's roughly 4 in 10. There's a separate figure in there that I can't stop thinking about. Nearly a quarter of institutions incurred restructuring costs in 2024 and 2025, voluntary redundancy schemes mostly. Now, I'm going to be careful here because this is exactly the point where somebody from a company like mine says, and that's why you need AI. But frankly, I'd rather chew glass. Because AI isn't a solution to a 40% sector deficit. And anyone who tells you it is doing what? That's right, they're selling. You're getting this now, aren't you? You're beginning to spot every week where we're going with this. But here's the honest version. It doesn't involve selling to you, and it's uncomfortable for a little while. If you're running a deficit, then every year you don't change your cost base is a year you spend reserves preserving an operating model you've already worked out you can't afford. You're just not admitting it. The deficit doesn't wait politely while you finish consulting, and the restructuring costs in the OFS report are mostly the cost of doing nothing arriving late, and arriving in the form of people losing their jobs because of it, which is the most expensive and heartfelt currency we have. The choice back at the start was never invest or save money. That's the mistake. It should be do we redesign the work or do we eventually remove the people that are doing it? Those are the two options. There isn't a third one where you just might label it wait and see what happens. You redesign the work, you find out what's wrong, you find out what you can fix, or you lose people. Our second currency is students. Now, this is the one where doing nothing stops being an actual strategy and starts being a fiction. HEPI published their third student generative AI survey, and 95% of UK undergraduates now use AI in at least one way. 94% of it used to help with assessed work. 94. And in that same survey, 38% say the institution provides AI tools. Around 37% feel the institution encourages them to use it, which is exactly the same proportion who feel it discourages them. Now that tells you everything about how coherent the sector's message currently is. 68% of students think AI skills are essential, but fewer than a half, 48%, feel their teaching staff are helping them develop those skills. Arts and humanities students feel it the worst. So, read those two sets of numbers next to each other. 94% using it on assessed work, 38% using it on everything. Whatever your institution's position on AI is, it's not being implemented because the behavior is universal and it's been universal for a while. Students are using this. And the only thing still generally undecided is whether or not it should be supervised. Our third currency is fairness. And this is the one I'd actually take to a governing body because it's not an efficiency argument. It's a moral one. If your institution provides nothing, students don't stop using AI. You've seen the numbers on this already. What happens instead is that access gets determined by who can afford the £20 a month to get the pro access. And that's it. That's the whole mechanism. The student on a full maintenance loan doing 20 hours a week in a warehouse gets the free tier while the usage caps with the usage caps and the older model. The student whose parents are covering rent gets the good one. Same assignment, same deadline, same marking criteria. HEPI have been tracking a widening AI divide across 3 surveys now by socioeconomic background, by discipline, and by gender. And I want to name the thing precisely because I think it normally goes unnamed. Doing nothing is not neutral. Doing nothing is an active decision to let ability pay determinate access to the tools students are using on access work. Nobody in this sector would sign a policy if you wrote that down and put it in front of them. It would never survive an access and participation plan. But that is the operating system of almost any institution that's decided anything and hasn't done anything about it for at least 2 years. The reality is this is where you are. Our fourth currency is staff. The Digital Education Council ran a globe-based survey this year, 45,000 odd responses across 35 countries. 88% of students using AI. 77% of faculty using it in their teaching, up 16 points in a year. And then, only 31% of faculty agree their institution involves them meaningfully in shaping AI policy. There's one more finding in there that I'd like to frame and hang on the wall of every senior team in this sector. In the US and Canada, faculty intent to use AI in future teaching went down 76% to 67, 9 points in 1 year, while usage went up. Sit with that for a minute because it breaks comfortable assumptions. The comfortable assumption is that if you wait, the ground settles, people get used to it, and you can move later with more consensus and less resistance. The data is saying the opposite, people. If you wait long enough without giving people position, you don't get patience. You get retreat. You get a vacuum. And that vacuum doesn't fill with calm. It fills with people quietly deciding this is something that's being done to them. And then they do one of two things. They give up, they freeze, or they walk. That's a cost. It might not appear in their budget, but you will pay it, and you will pay it for at least a decade. So here's where I've landed, and it took me a bit longer than I should have, I suppose. Every institution in this country has already developed generative AI at scale. Not the ones with the strategy, all of them. Every single one. 95% of your students are using it. 77% of your academics are using it in their teaching. It's in your assessment process, your marking, your student support conversations, your admissions inquiries, your internal comms, your policy drafting, and about 40% of the documents that reach your desk. It went in with no procurement. It went in with no data protection impact assessment. It went in with no accessibility review. It went in with no supply due diligence. It's got no ideas which tools, on which terms, with which data. It's got no contract. It's got no exit plan. It's got no permissions model. And it's got no way of knowing whether the answer somebody got was the one they were entitled to. If a supplier had done that to you, rolled out a platform to your entire student body and most of your staff with no paperwork, you'd have them in a room with a gun to their head by Thursday saying, what the hell are you playing at? You didn't choose not to adopt AI. That option expired somewhere around early 24. You cannot choose to govern an adoption that was going to happen regardless. And this is the reframe. The question on this table was never whether we should do it, it's whether it was governed or not governed. And doing nothing has only ever been an answer to the first question. So, what do you actually do? And I mean this week, not next academic year. I'm going to tell you write a strategy. Now, you may already have one, and it may already be good, but I'm going to give you 1 hour and one cell of one spreadsheet. In every AI business case, on every options appraisal I've ever read, there's a table. And the first row of that table is always some version of option 0, do nothing. And the cost of option 0 is always entered as 0 or left blank or filled in with the words no additional cost. Change that number. Change it to a named human being, ideally somebody in finance rather than somebody in IT, because finance will be less charitable, and ask them to fill it in properly. What we're spending on the manual version of this process right now in staff time at real salary cost is scary. And how many of our students using unsanctioned consumer tools and access work? What's our exposure the first time more than pay something personal or disclosable into a free tier? We don't know, and you won't know until you do the work to find out. And what does your structure look like if we leave this 2 more years instead of one? What's the access and participation cost of the divide we're currently choosing going to get to? You don't need a strategy for that. You need one honest number in one cell, because right now that cell says zero, and everyone in the room knows it's a lie, and the entire decision rests on it. And then, briefly, because it's the other half of the sentence, the answer to do nothing is not doing anything. Panic buying a thin wrap around a general purpose model with no grounding in your own content and no permissions awareness will cost you more than standing still, because you'll spend 3 years and a lot of goodwill discovering it doesn't know anything about your institution. We did a whole boring episode on that. Do you remember? Yeah, yeah, we did. We did. Right, we're on to the signal. You remember this? One small news item from the wider world that I think says more than it meant to. The same OFS financial stability work that I mentioned earlier has also picked this up. Buried in the analysis is a section on how accurate institutions' own forecasts turn out to be. Large research-intensive universities have predicted undergraduate numbers would fall by 1.7%. Guess what? They grew by 9.9%. Teaching intensive smaller and specialist institutions had forecast growth, but their recruitment fell. So it wasn't just wrong, it was wrong in opposite directions, by institutional type, simultaneously. The regulator has a phrase for it, which is persistent over optimism. And the OFS's directive regulation said in as many words that this fixation on expected future growth is constraining the pace and scale of actions that institutions need to take. And that's the bit that I want to leave with you. Because the single most common reason for not acting like it yet is that we're waiting for more clarity about the future. And if you've been listening properly, and I'm sure you have, you'll know that just waiting for the future is the worst thing you could do. And not only that, but we now know because of this report that the sector's own forecast of its own core business just 1 year out using its own data was off by 11 percentage points. There is no more clarity coming. This is the clarity. Yes, it's blurry, but it's blurry for everybody. 48 years ago, between 12 sailors on the Salisbury and an order that every man in the fleet should get 3/4 of an ounce of lemon juice a day. And within about 2 years of that order, scurvy had all but gone from the Royal Navy. Nobody was ever held to account for the 48 years, and nobody ever will be, because the thing that happened during them was nothing, and nothing leaves no evidence. I don't think anyone in HEPI is going to be hauled up in front of a committee in 5 years' time and asked why they didn't move faster on AI. I think what will happen is much quieter than that. A few institutions will have redesigned how work gets done and will be running with a cost base that fits their income. A few more will have made a mess of it in public and learned something expensive. And a fair number will have spent the period producing exceptionally well formatted documents about their intentions and then made the cuts anyway. And the two things will be discussed in entirely separate meetings. So, go and find the do nothing wrong, whatever business case is currently sitting in your inbox, and look at what's in the cost column. If it says zero, somebody's already made a decision. It just wasn't at a meeting. I'll leave you with this. In the words of Dr. Crispin Bloomfield, my erstwhile colleague, he says to me, here is the cost of doing nothing 100 years ago, and 10 years ago, and the cost of doing nothing a year ago. And then there's the cost of doing nothing today. The thing is, the world and context around each decision point has changed. The education sector today is not the same as yesterday, and it will be different tomorrow. For the first time last year, academic staff saw a contraction in the number of teaching staff working in the sector. The AI technology is moving with velocity, and as a former Microsoft colleague described it to me, the cost of trying to catch up is becoming exponentially more expensive. So here's my call to you. If you worry that you're doing nothing because you don't know how to do something, I guarantee you that financially, constraint wise, and staff wise, it's going to cost you more and more and more. There is no time like the present to get ahead of it, to try and find out exactly where you are, to reach out to me to see how I can help you. I'm Andy Logan. This has been Higher Levels. Count your lemons, make sure you don't get scurvy, and take care of yourselves. And I will see you next week when we talk about the assessment piece. That's right. I just said to you that we can do an assessment to help you figure out where you are. But what is that assessment? What does it look like? What does it do? You know I'm going to tell you, don't you? Yeah, of course you do. Until then, have a good week.